it's interesting to note the evolution of the Moog synthesizer. I wish I had it on tape. I think that tape is lost. I do have one interview tape that I did with Bob Moog, I think about 1970. It may be lost, or he may have had me turn it off, which he did a couple of times about some things that were sensitive. But I asked the rather obvious question, well, what are you going to do after this? And he said, what do you mean after this? I said, well, there's only so many people that have $15,000 for a Moog 900 series synthesizer. Oh, well, we have $150,000 of back orders, and I pretty much shut up because I felt like, well, I've said what I think, and this is Bob Moog. I'm just Tom Rhea, a graduate student. But Bob was not really that sensitive. For one thing, he liked to handle personally musicians who came to the plant, and they came in many numbers. He did a lot of one-ofs. They would ask for something special. All of a sudden now they were building one-of. And that really ate into the company's profits, I think. And it was interesting to understand the dynamic of the early days versus the other periods. And they sort of go by plants. Where was the plant, the facility for making the things for the Moog synthesizer? Well, it started essentially in Bob Moog's house, of course, but when it became a factory, it was in Trumansburg, New York, and it was in a made-over hardware store, a couple of stories. And as a matter of fact, when I interviewed him, we crawled out the second floor window onto the roof of a shed roof extending off of the first floor. That's the only place we could find to have enough quiet that I could actually interview him. There was a group of engineers, Bill Hemsath, Jim Scott, a number of people. I'm leaving people out, but there were musicians around, David Borden, Jonathan Weiss. In other words, there was a small nucleus of people that were vitally interested in this new thing, and they recognized that it was a new thing. And I think Bob was having trouble keeping up, with trying to fulfill demands for people coming in saying, well, I want one that's got this special feature and stuff like that. He did one of us like that. That was kind of the atmosphere at the Trumansburg plant. It's interesting to note that when Norlin, the company got in trouble, the Moog company was in trouble fiscally, financially. And as a matter of fact, when Bob was off to New York seeking funding, he had left strict instructions. I don't want you to start doing any new development. That's, I'm telling the bank, no, we're becoming more business-like and so forth. Well, Bill Hemsath actually sawed off a cabinet and everything and put some Moog 900 modules in it, and put a keyboard in it, and that was the Mini Moog Model A. And then there was a Mini Moog Model B that actually had a front panel that I think Bill Hemsath had actually laid out and designed. Of course, at that plant, there was capacity for making circuit boards, silk screening for panels and things like that. A complete facility, woodworking and so forth. Well, the story is, and Jim Scott would bear this out, I think, that when Bob came back, he was really quite upset that his edict had been ignored. I mean, here's a Mini Moog, and I think Hemsath had been pushing for a long time, and also a man named Gene Zumchak had been pushing for a long time, realizing that what I had said, frankly, there's only so many people that have $15,000 that can buy a large modular system. And there needs to be something that you can unpack, get out, and play for rock and roll. So there was a period of time in which Bob was unsure about, what was the value of a Mini Moog. Did he really believe in so forth and so on? And there's a lot of arguments about it, and I don't wish to enter that fray. I think Brian Kehoe will straighten that out. But there was 1A, 2Bs, and 4Cs, C models, and they went to various and sundry people. David Borden had a very early model. Sun Ra had a very early model. These are all excellent musicians, that got some of these early models. And at some point, this is, I think, where David Van Koevering played a vital role in the evolution of the Moog, because he got wind of this mini Moog. He had been out with a modular Moog, which he had bought from Bob, but I think Bob gave him a special price because David and Becky Van Koevering were out doing vaudeville shows at Glen Bell's restaurants, Taco Bell's. They would go to a Taco Bell and entertain people, and they were paid. Prior to that, they'd gone to high schools with this vaudeville shows, sleigh bells you could ring, and Deegan organ chimes, tuned rocks that you would strike, and Becky would play the keyboard. So they added the Moog synthesizer to this vaudeville-like thing. Well, Dave came from a good background for that. His father had used those kinds of vaudeville instruments, Deegan coins. They're discs with serrated edges around the periphery, and you spun them on a marble top, and they made this racket, but in pitch. So I'm sure it was a very interesting show. I never actually got to see it. But basically, I think David Van Koevering, it's true that he asked Bob Moog, well, how many of these mini Moogs are you going to make? And the story is, well, Bob said, I think we'll make about 50 of them. And Dave said, I'll take all of them. I'll buy all of them. And so I think Bob Moog took him at his word, and I think Dave did buy all of them. He got a partner named Les Truby, who ran Central Music, the biggest organ place east of the Mississippi eventually, a very big organ store, a home organ. And I think Les bankrolled this, and David Van Koevering indeed took off in his Cadillac with a couple of mini Moogs in the trunk, and his modus operandi was very simple. He'd go into the dealer and say, look, this is the latest new thing. This is going to be it. This is going to be the biggest thing. Oh, well, I don't believe that, the dealer would say. Obviously, they told me that when I went out as a clinician. So Dave would say, well, okay, if I can sell one to a local musician and give you the profit, will you order another one? Will you take this other one? Will you buy another one? Sure, why not? I'll do that. So Dave would go out and literally work the clubs and find musicians and actually go get them financing so they could buy a mini Moog. Even a mini Moog was $1,500–$1,600, as I recall, in that day. And he would make good on his promise. He'd sell one, the dealer would take one. He went from one city to the other like that. And I really believe that David Van Koevering and Becky, supporting him on all this, deserves the credit for teaching the entire industry how to sell synthesizers to the working musician. Prior to that, I wouldn't say they sold themselves, but I'd say that institutional sales were about what there was. There were a few rich musicians that owned a Moog. I guess some of the Beatles owned one. Several famous personalities owned a Moog synthesizer at $15,000–$20,000. That was a lot of money in 1968, 69, 70. That was a wad of money. But Van Koevering showed, I think, the entire industry, this is how you sell them. And they are sellable. Now, even as late as when I started going out, let's see, the Model D Mini Moog manual that I wrote had a copyright date of 1974, and I was up the year before that and worked to help develop trade show materials for what was known as the Constellation. It was a Taurus bass pedals on the floor, Constellation, which was a 4-octave keyboard, which became eventually the Polymoog, a totally polyphonic instrument, and then on top was something called the Lyra, Lyra. Well, the Lyra never came out as itself. It was changed around, and Jim Scott and I developed the Micro Moog, the Multi Moog, several models after that. But I was there at that time, And I was nominally there to run Studio Systems Division. I was given a big title, Vice President, Studio Systems Division. Big title, no money. And that was modular equipment, much as we see in my studio here. This is from those days. That's NOS stock. That's 1970s stuff. So I did that, and I did pretty well. I probably broke restraint of trade laws or fair trade laws because the problem was everybody selling to these institutions, everybody would bid, and they would try to outbid each other, and nobody was making any money. So I called up each one of them, and I said, well, look, I've carved out territories for each of you, and I don't care if you like it. This is it. That's your territory. I don't care whether you like it or not. Here's the way it works. I did this on the phone, of course, not in writing. And I said, if an instrument's going to be sold in your territory, you will bid a few dollars below list. If you see a bid coming from that territory and it's not your territory, you will bid over list by a significant amount. So each one of you is going to make some money now. That worked. It may have been a little bit dicey with restraint of trade laws, but what did I know? I wasn't really a businessman, so it worked. So I doubled sales in about 6 months. It was pretty impressive. But then again, I was hired to sell modular equipment, but for one reason or the other, since I'd written the Mini Moog manuals, well, he knows the instrument well, he could go out and let's see if he can sell Mini Moogs. So I was sent out on a couple of ventures to dealers as a clinician, as it was called. And lo and behold, yes, I could sell Mini Moogs. They sold quite handily after my clinics, and the dealers ordered more and so forth. Well, obviously, you know what the company does then. I now become a Mini Moog clinician, So we hired another guy named Dale Jensen, who happened to be the brother of the director of public school music where my first wife was teaching in Manatee County, Florida. So the entire thing at that time was an incredibly small fraternity. I mean, you knew everybody. You knew your competitors. You knew all of them. We all knew each other, and it was a very close-knit and very small group of men, primarily. Women entered very late, and I might add, in defense of the idea of diversity, I'm all in favor of it. However, women had just as much a chance to buy a Mini Moog as men did. Possibly there weren't as many women in rock and roll because of biases. I can't address that. I don't know. But I know that there was nothing we were doing to restrict sales to anybody. We were ready to do distaff cash, as I called it. You want a Mini Moog? Sure. We even had a stupid ad that said sold to qualified musicians. And my comment aside was, yeah, anybody's qualified who has the money.